about grief. And grief is not a very upbeat subject to talk about, so I'll do my best to keep it as upbeat as possible. It's something we all have in common. We've all experienced grief, no matter where we are in the world, no matter what culture we are from. Every single one of us has experienced grief at some time or another. And how we deal with that grief at that moment is really what I want to talk about today. You know, in certain Middle Eastern cultures and moving towards Asia, some of the Asian cultures, they're much better at dealing with grief than we are, because they allow themselves to feel fully that emotion at the time, so that they feel it fully and completely within the physical, so that it engulfs every cell of their body. And that way they learn to move forward after fully grieving, and they're not carrying that burden of grief around with them. Whereas in the Western world, we are conditioned to cry a little and then, you know, stiff upper lip, bury it down and move forwards. Got to keep on, got to get back to normality, got to stay positive. And we get brought up with those kind of values because our ancestors, have the same approach. And there are various stages to grief. And we can grieve loved ones, pets, and situations. And we can also be carrying grief from our ancestors, and that's something to consider as well. That, you know, through our genes, there may be some grief that has been passed on that can potentially cause physical symptoms within us, something that we don't often think or realise. But of course we are inheriting those energies of the people that have gone before us, and it gets less and less each time, but it's still there within our genetic makeup. And we can change it, so, you know, we're not stuck with it. So looking at the stages of grief, you receive the news of a loved one, or perhaps you've had a pet that's had to be put to sleep or has died naturally or otherwise. And there is that sense of coping with the news, of just getting by, just trying to go through your daily chores, if you like, washing up, hoovering, just trying to make sense of it all, getting used to them not being around as we move into that stage of realization. Realization is much more about making sense of it, realizing they're not there anymore. You know, the pitter-patter of those tiny little feet and the bark or the meow that once was there is no longer there. And it is getting used to that. And this is the stage where we can often feel anger and upset, things that weren't said, perhaps memories coming back from the past of the way you were treated or not treated, or things that you wish you'd said and done or hadn't said and done, all of that. The realization stage can bring out senses of depression and fear. And that's okay. It's about allowing yourself to go through these stages and accepting that whatever is coming up in you needs to be felt. Not dismissed, not pushed down as you may have done in the past, but felt. As you move through that realization stage, you move into the stage called immobilization. And that can be emotional, paralysis. And I'm not saying that everyone moves through each of these stages exactly, but these are the general stages of grief. And for many, it's moving from one stage to another. For others, it's moving straight through, from the first stage to the end stage. It really depends on the individual. But immobilization can very much be about feeling stuck, feeling powerless, sometimes feeling victimized by a situation or by what has happened to an individual or a loved one. Then if we feel ourselves fully in that, we can move on to the stage of acceptance. Acceptance is about the emotional pain being reduced. There, we're accepting the situation, we're accepting what has happened, we're accepting that that person, that loved one, that animal is no longer there, that situation is no longer there. And that acceptance then will lead us on to this stage of being able to let go. But that's often the stage that people get stuck at, actually letting go. Because for many, they feel if they're going to let go of the grief, then there's a feeling of a sense of betrayal for that person. So they hang on to that grief and they hang on to the memory of them. They feel if they allow themselves to be happy, then they're not serving that individual, not serving the love that they had for that person. So they hang on to every bit of that grief that they can in order to keep hold of the memory of that person, or in order to feel that, you know, I'm holding on to the grief because I love you. And particularly when you've got a parent that's lost a child, this is particularly prominent, or a loved one, or a husband or a wife. You know, you feel that if I allow myself to be happy, then I'm betraying the memory of that loved one. But actually all you're doing energetically is kind of pulling them forward, pulling them in, and not allowing them to fully release, because you're keeping that energetic hook there out of your need to feel that love. And it's important to remember that that love is always there. It doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't disappear. That heart connection with that individual is always there. And they may, from, you know, the physical side of them may have gone, but the energetic side is still there. It's just moved into a different dimension energetically. So that heart connection is always there. And the last thing that they would want is for you to sit there miserable and grieving and feeling sad all the time. It's such a waste of life. It's such a waste. So it's important that when we're going through that grieving process, that we allow ourselves to fully feel what we're feeling, feel it into the energy. And problems come about when we don't fully express that grief at the time of grieving. And most of us will, if not all of us, will grieve, you know, more than once in our lifetime. We'll grieve the loss of our parents, grandparents, pets, loved ones, situations. And so that grief, unless we fully express it every single time, that grief is going to stack up. And it does. It stacks up one after the other, after the other, after the other. So you can find that, you know, somewhere down the line, you're grieving perhaps the loss of a pet or the loss of someone else, and it seems enormous, overwhelming. And the reason it becomes enormous and overwhelming is because of all the other buried grief that hasn't been fully expressed, that's come before it. So we have to allow ourselves to fully feel into that grief when it happens, feel into those emotions. And it's okay. It's okay to do that. You're not going to suddenly become overwhelmed and die as a result of feeling it, because those feelings can feel so incredibly overwhelming, you know? Incredibly depressing, incredibly overwhelming. But the thing is, if we don't fully feel into it, then we will end up, you know, further down the line with things like depression and anger, and it's all buried there, and it will fester and it will manifest in some physical condition, and it's the last thing that you want. It's the last thing your loved ones would want you to do as well. So it's important to allow yourself to fully feel into any emotions that you feel when you lose somebody, and know that you're still connected by the heart to that person, that animal. The physical is gone, the energy remains, they're still around, that consciousness is still there. So free yourself and know that actually the more that they can see that you're okay and you're coping all right without them, and you can get on and live your life without them, the more at peace that will help them on the other side as well. So free yourself up. You take care.